The will my husband's lawyer read to me 3 days after the funeral left me everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, the vehicle, all of it. I sat in that office and felt grief. Yes, and the particular hollow gratitude of a widow who has been provided for, who does not have to worry about money on top of everything else she is worrying about. I drove home and started the quiet, terrible work of living without him. Then, for days later, a different lawyer called. Not my husband's lawyer, a woman I had never heard of. She said she had represented my husband in a separate capacity and that there was something I needed to know. She said it carefully. The way people say things they are not entirely sure they should be saying, but have decided they must. She said there was a second will, and that someone had made sure it was the only one anyone was supposed to find. Welcome to Grandma Payback Stories. I am Grandma, and today I want to start by saying that this story is about a woman who did absolutely nothing wrong and had everything taken from her by someone with audacity that is genuinely difficult to comprehend. It is also a story about a lawyer who chose conscience over comfort, and about what happens when forgery meets a forensic document examiner. Before we get into it, please subscribe and tap the notification bell. I post new stories every single week, and I am so grateful for every single one of you here. Let us talk about Evelyn, her late husband Harold, and the mistress who nearly got away with everything. Evelyn was 66 years old when Harold died. They had been married for 38 years. Harold was a retired contractor who had done well, built a successful business over 40 years, sold it a decade before his death, and settled into a comfortable retirement. They were not wealthy in any extravagant sense, but they were secure, and that security was the product of decades of careful work and shared frugality, and the kind of financial discipline that people of their generation often possessed. Harold had died of complications from surgery. Not unexpected exactly, because the surgery had been high risk, but still shocking when the moment came, because you are never really prepared, no matter how many times people tell you to be. Evelyn had spent 3 weeks in the fog of fresh grief before she was able to sit in a lawyer's office and listen to a will being read. The will left her everything. She had been present for the signing of it 12 years ago. She remembered the afternoon clearly, the lawyer's office, the witness signatures, Harold's careful reading of each page before signing. It had felt, at the time, like an act of love made formal. She had gone home afterward and made dinner and felt settled in the way you feel when practical matters have been handled. What she had not known was that Harold had also consulted a second attorney, alone, 8 years ago, to revise his instructions regarding a different matter, and that someone else had known about those revised instructions and had decided they needed to disappear. The lawyer who called was named Beverly. She had a small practice and had been handling estate documents for 30 years. She had met with Harold twice, 8 years ago, in connection with a specific bequest he wanted to make. He had wanted to establish a trust for a grandniece who was estranged from her parents and for whom Harold felt particular responsibility. He had not told Evelyn because the trust was modest, drawn from assets he considered personal, and because he had wanted it to be private. Beverly had prepared the documents. Harold had signed them. They had been valid and properly executed. Beverly had known Harold was ill and had expected to be contacted after his death to present the trust documents as part of the estate proceedings. She had not been contacted. She had waited a respectful amount of time and then contacted Harold's primary attorney, a man named Gerald, to coordinate the estate administration. Gerald had told her, in terms she found strange, that the estate had been fully administered and there was nothing further required. Beverly had found this impossible since the trust she held was clearly part of the estate. Gerald had not returned her subsequent calls. That was when Beverly had decided to call Evelyn directly. Evelyn listened to all of this and felt two things at once. Relief that the trust for the grandniece was not a hidden family crisis she was learning about, and a creeping suspicion about why Beverly's documents had been treated as non-existent. She asked Beverly to meet with her the following day and bring everything. Beverly brought the trust documents. She also brought something she had found when she pulled Harold's full file in preparation for the meeting. A copy of a will dated 14 months before Harold's death, which Beverly had been given by Harold as reference material when drafting the trust. It was not the will Evelyn had witnessed 12 years ago. It was newer, and it was substantially different. Harold's newer will, the one Beverly had in her files as a reference copy, left the primary estate to Evelyn, with one significant change: a provision setting aside 22% of the investment portfolio for a woman named Renata Shields, described as a dear friend. The 12-year-old will that Gerald had read at the estate meeting left everything to Evelyn with no mention of Renata Shields whatsoever. The will Gerald had read was either the original, superseded document that should have been replaced, or it was something else. Evelyn called her own attorney that afternoon, a woman named Patricia who had handled her personal legal matters for years, and asked her to find out which. Patricia requested the filed will from the probate court along with all supporting documentation. She also retained a forensic document examiner named Dr. Howell, who had testified as an expert witness in dozens of cases involving questioned documents and who brought to the work the particular enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loves detecting things that are wrong. Dr. Howell examined the will that Gerald had filed with the court. She examined the paper, the ink, the signature, the witness signatures, and the notarization. She took 3 weeks and produced a report that was 31 pages long and unambiguous in its conclusions. The will filed by Gerald was not genuine. The paper stock predated the supposed signing date by at least 8 years, indicating the document had been prepared on paper that was not current at the time it claimed to have been executed. The ink on Harold's signature was inconsistent with the ink on the rest of the document in ways that indicated it had been added at a different time. The signature itself, when compared to authenticated samples of Harold's signature from across his life, showed specific inconsistencies in pen pressure and letter formation that indicated it had been executed by a different hand, working from a template rather than by Harold himself. The notarization was the most damning detail. The notary whose stamp appeared on the will was a woman who had passed away 2 years before the document's supposed signing date. She had been a deceased notary for 24 months when her stamp appeared on a will certifying Harold's live signature. Someone had forged a will. Someone had forged it carefully, using paper old enough to look contemporaneous, using a dead notary stamp, using a practiced version of Harold's signature, but they had not been careful enough because they had not accounted for Dr. Howell. The real question was who. Evelyn thought about who had access to Harold during his final years, who had known about his financial situation, who had understood the estate well enough to construct a convincing forgery. She thought about Gerald, the attorney who had administered the estate smoothly and deflected Beverly's calls. And then she thought about Renata Shields, the woman who had been in Harold's original, newer will and who had disappeared from the forged one. Renata Shields was not removed because she was guilty. She was removed because someone did not want Evelyn asking questions about who Renata was and why Harold had left her anything. Renata Shields was Harold's cousin, a distant one on his mother's side, who had fallen on difficult financial circumstances in her 60s and to whom Harold had felt a quiet sense of familial obligation. Harold had included her in his updated will because he wanted to help her. He had not told Evelyn about many of his family's financial situations, preferring to manage those privately, rather than make them subjects of household discussion. Renata was innocent of everything except being the reason someone needed the real will to disappear. The person who had needed it to disappear was Gerald. Gerald, Harold's primary attorney of many years, had been managing Harold's investment accounts in the final years of his life as Harold's health declined, and he became less able to oversee his finances himself. In the course of that management, Gerald had been siphoning small percentages presented as fees, as expenses, as adjustments. Over 4 years, he had redirected approximately $109,000 from Harold's accounts into his own. Harold, as he became more ill, had apparently begun to suspect something was wrong. In his final months, he had met twice with Beverly, the second attorney, asking vague questions about the trust and about what protections existed if a financial manager was not acting appropriately. Beverly had not known at the time that he was describing his own situation. She had given general answers. Harold had died before he was well enough to take further action. Gerald had known Harold suspected. He had known the estate administration would bring scrutiny, so he had created a will that named himself as sole executor with expanded authority, replaced the real document that would have named Evelyn co-executor, removed Renata Shields because Renata would have had questions about the estate and might have consulted her own attorney. He had buried the dead notary's stamp in the paperwork, hoping no one would check whether the notary had been alive when she supposedly certified it. He had been, in other words, thorough but not thorough enough. Gerald's arrest came on a Thursday. He was charged with forgery of a legal document, fraud upon the court, theft by breach of fiduciary duty, and financial elder abuse. The last charge carried enhanced sentencing because Harold had been elderly and infirm when the exploitation occurred. Gerald's attorney was competent, but the evidence was the kind of evidence that does not leave much room for creative defense. Dr. Howell's report alone was a prosecution exhibit that made jurors lean forward in their seat. Gerald was convicted on all counts. The sentence was 11 years. He was also disbarred permanently, which meant that even if he served reduced time, he was returning to a world in which his profession was gone. The Bar Association, which had been contacted before the criminal charges were filed, conducted its own parallel proceeding and revoked his license, with the particular thoroughness that professional bodies apply when one of their members has embarrassed the entire field. The estate was reopened. The probate court voided the forged will and reinstated the proceedings based on Beverly's reference copy of the genuine updated will, which was authenticated by Dr. Howell as consistent with Harold's authentic signature and appropriately executed. Evelyn received everything that Harold had intended for her. Renata Shields received the provision Harold had wanted her to have. The grandniece received the trust Beverly had been holding in her files for 8 years. The money Gerald had siphoned was recovered through civil proceedings against his assets and his professional liability insurance, which covered a portion of the fraudulent conduct. Not all of it was recovered because some had been spent, but the majority came back to the estate and therefore to Evelyn. Evelyn thought about Harold often in the months after everything was resolved. She thought about the afternoon 12 years ago, when she had watched him sign the original will carefully, reading every page. She thought about the fact that he had gone back 8 years later and updated it quietly, responsibly, the way he had always handled things, with quiet responsibility. She thought about how he had suspected Gerald in his final months and had not been well enough to do what needed to be done about it. She thought about what it must have been like to be sick and frightened and aware that someone you trusted was stealing from you and not know how to stop it. She wished he had told her. She understood why he had not, which was the particular stubbornness of a man of his generation who handled things privately and did not want to worry people. But she wished he had. She would have been very useful. She sent Beverly a good bottle of wine. Beverly called to thank her and Evelyn said, "You made a phone call when you did not have to. You could have decided it was not your business and let it go, and Gerald would have gotten away with everything." Beverly said she had thought about that and decided she could not look at herself in the mirror if she stayed quiet. Evelyn said that was the right decision and she was grateful. Beverly was the kind of person who made it. She keeps Beverly's number saved in her phone under the name The Lawyer Who Told the Truth. She has not needed to call it again, but she is glad it is there. If this story left you floored, hit that like button and subscribe to Grandma Payback Stories right now. Leave me a comment and tell me what made you the most furious and what gave you the most satisfaction. Tell me about Beverly. Tell me about Dr. Howell and her 31-page report. Tell me what you felt when the dead notary stamp came up. I read every single comment, and new stories are here every week. I will see you in the next one.